people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go.
Well, good evening and welcome to the much delayed and very socially distanced Future of the BBC Forum, taking place via the wonders of modern technology and hosted by the Croydon Constitutionalists. My name is Dan Heaton and I will be your host today, and I'm delighted to be joined by three speakers to discuss the future of the BEEB. For nearly a century now, the BBC has purported to inform, educate and entertain the people of this country, and indeed to charge us a levy for the privilege. But with the plethora of media available now, not least various subscription streaming services, can the BBC really be justified in its current guise? The first of our speakers this evening is Sophia Zurova, the former Brighton Group Leader of the Libertarian Party. Sophia, welcome. Please share your thoughts with us on the BBC.
So firstly, I would like to say that I think the idea behind the BBC, at least on the surface, was quite a noble one, aiming to give everyone access to a common source of entertainment and, more importantly, delivering reliable news content. This can be very unifying for a nation, especially in times of struggle, can be an equalizer as well as a great booster for a stronger sense of national identity. As the BBC said so themselves, in the fight against fascism, broadcasting played a starring role as informant, morale booster, and propaganda weapon. So, as you can probably predict, I'm going to be focusing on the idea of it being as a propaganda weapon, which I think didn't really stop after the Second World War. So, as I'm sure you've all noticed over the past few months, the BBC News in particular has kept us all very up to date and informed about the coronavirus situation, coming out with article headlines such as COVID-19, should we be worried? These were of course churned out very regularly with a strong sense of, yes, we should be worried, as they like to emphasize on every out of the ordinary tragic case, such as young people dying, pointing out this could happen to you or your kids, while of course including small print that no one is supposed to read, saying that deaths can be reported as COVID related, even if the cause of death wasn't directly COVID, but they did test for the coronavirus around the same time. I think if there is one thing a state-sponsored media outlet is going to do is make sure that the people are scared and end up trusting the authorities to take care of them. I think that's been achieved quite well, as we've seen recently. But another striking and definitely most obvious propaganda piece I found was on the 21st of October, two articles right next to each other without any sense of irony, one titled, "How are people breaking the coronavirus rules?" and the other right next to it titled, "Why we took to the streets in a pandemic. Young activists explain the challenges they had to face while demonstrating during a global pandemic." The first one wasn't directly bashing people for not sticking to all the rules, of course. It did try to be somewhat sympathetic, saying that some found it difficult with keeping up with all the ever-changing guidelines and others were simply forgetting their masks from time to time. But it still had the underlying tone of emphasizing people's selfishness and how forgetfulness can be harmful to wider society. In contrast to this, the people who were protesting during the pandemic, specifically the Black Lives Matter protests, while they were breaking social distancing, it was framed as if it was under a noble cause and as if they acted in self-sacrifice. Of course, I am quite sympathetic to these protests, but I don't think there's much point in them, especially in Britain. Since the actual issues are in America, all we're doing is worsening the COVID case, at least as the BBC present it, but don't like to admit it equally. For example, the anti-lockdown protests were shown no sympathy compared to the Black Lives Matter ones. Another example of the BBC as mostly being a propaganda machine is their way of presenting Brexit. So according to a YouGov poll, both Leave and Remain voters felt that the BBC had a more anti-Brexit leaning than a pro-Brexit leaning, with 45% of Leave voters saying BBC News were anti-Brexit, 37% weren't sure, and 13% of Leave voters thought BBC News was neither pro nor anti-Brexit. Now, if the BBC really were balanced, as they aimed to be, the percentage of neither would be a lot higher, in my opinion. In another poll, which aimed to find out which papers were seen as the most pro or anti-Brexit, the BBC ranked as second highest, just after The Guardian in its anti-Brexit reporting. I'm sure we can all remember the times when any positive news about the economy after the Brexit vote came out, it was always reported as occurring despite Brexit, framing the Brexit vote as a national disaster we would never recover from or forget, as opposed to celebrating it as the biggest democratic vote of our lifetime. Now, as for the future of the BBC, given my examples earlier and people's general feelings, at least according to the polls, I think the future of the BBC is looking pretty bleak. The BBC as we know it is likely coming to an end, as half of Britons believe the TV licence fee should be scrapped. I think the BBC should be funded completely through its advertising and maybe a subscription fee among other media corporations. The Times also recently reported that the number of licenses held across the UK fell by 82,000 in the 5 months since March this year. That's an average of around 550 per day. While people are scrapping their licenses, they're of course signing up to streaming services such as Netflix and Amazon Prime. This rapid change has led to the BBC debating the decriminalisation of non-payment of the licence fee. So I think that's already moving towards some kind of a change. But of course, it's difficult to know for sure if this is going to be a continuous downward spiraling pattern of less people paying for a TV licence and consuming BBC content, or if that's just a result of the lockdown and people struggling financially. Regardless of the speed at which their popularity is declining, I believe that sooner or later they will have to change their business model if they want to survive and remain competitive. Now, just speaking from personal experience, all my friends and people who are of similar age as me use streaming services as opposed to purchasing TV license. It just turns out cheaper as people share accounts. And of course, there is a greater freedom of choice when it comes to watching content, and you have it there on demand and you don't have to just consume whatever is playing there at one moment. But to its credit, the BBC still produces some great content and has given us many cult classics, such as Doctor Who. But even though that is a national treasure, it seems to be going downhill pretty quickly. Now, going back to my previous point of BBC being a propaganda machine and not being as politically neutral as they like to lead us to believe, the latest Doctor Who series is a very clear example of that, with one of the episodes quite literally being presented as just Trump and guns bad and capitalism is inherently anti-environmental. I don't know if people watched that one. It was in season 11, episode 4, I believe. I did some digging to see what all the media outlets thought was the problem behind the negative ratings. A few bravely defended the bad ratings as the latest season as people just not watching BBC shows anymore, saying that Doctor Who got worse is just a regular trend now, since everyone is increasingly turning to Netflix, that this was the issue rather than anything to do with politics of the show, turning people off. After all, season 10 with Peter Capaldi wasn't so great according to ratings either. But when I went to have a look at this and compare those ratings, Capaldi's Doctor season 10 got a 69% approval rating from the audience. This is from Rotten Tomatoes. And Jodie Whittaker's Doctor from season 12 got a 16% audience approval rating. To me, it's quite obvious that it is the politics that's holding these shows back, as well as bad writing here and there. But the politics is very blatant. It's increasingly becoming more difficult to defend the BBC as a non-biased and neutral media outlet. I think if the BBC wish to stay relevant and have some kind of popular future, they need to change their business model and become more self-sufficient and focus further on their income generated from selling their shows and use ads or adopt a subscription style model instead of the license fee. Lastly, I think they should really try to stick to their political neutrality and their unbiased goal, if that's how they wish to present themselves. I truly think that if they really stuck with that, they would be much better off. We currently live in a political environment where everyone is constantly being forced to choose between two extremes. But I think at the end of the day, people don't really want this to last in the long run. And the BBC could potentially be a great escape from the political madness, but at the moment it's not providing that at all. If they want to stick around, they need to convince people that they really are neutral again, and simply pointing at different sides saying, see, we're making everyone angry, so it must be neutral, isn't working for anyone anymore. So that's my general feeling about the BBC and its future.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Our next speaker is Jeet Bains. Jeet is the councillor for Addiscombe East here in Croydon. Jeet, please let us have your thoughts on the BBC.
Thank you, Dan. Very interesting listening to Sophia's views there. So if we start with the initial principles that the BBC was created on, Lord Reith's principles of educate, entertain and inform. Educate, I think, you know, if you look at what's been going on during the pandemic, a lot of families have had to educate particularly younger children from home. Even older children, sort of GCSE and A-level or international baccalaureate, whatever they're doing, a lot of resources have had to be found online. And my understanding is the BBC has tried to step up and provide resources and pointers and information to help in that regard. I'm old enough to remember on BBC Two you used to get Open University lectures. That was all pre-internet times. So the vehicle of the BBC was used to, you know, fulfill that role of educate. And a lot of the children's programs used to have or had an educate element in them. So I think overall, the BBC is pretty good on the educate front. And if you think of educate in the wider context about the environment or what's happening in the economy and different subjects, there's a role that they're playing there in documentaries and so on. And I think they're pretty world-class in a lot of that. On entertain, it's one of those subjective things, isn't it? It depends what you like as entertainment. I personally I find I don't watch the BBC much these days for entertainment. As Sophia said, I probably watch more Amazon Prime and Netflix, things on YouTube and what have you. So yeah, I mean, entertain, but there are many people who, for example, like Strictly. I'm never, really not my thing. So I haven't really watched it, but there seems to be something there on the entertain side, but perhaps it could be more fine-tuned or more targeted to particular customer segments and just overall more efficient. But on inform, I think, you know, there's probably more issues there that need to be addressed. So, you know, inform, a big part of that is news and current affairs. And if we look at news, I do think particularly more recently, the BBC has tried to be more even-handed and more fair, but it's quite obvious they have a slant towards a particular view. So if we take, for example, the Brexit debate, there was a very strong feeling in the country. I perceived that they were anti-Brexit, but I don't think they were the only one. But we are talking about the BBC, and so I think there's something that needs to be addressed there. Is there too much bias in one direction in this organisation called the BBC. So I think there's something there that needs to be looked at. And as part of that, it's the views of the journalists and the presenters. So if we think back to the days of Sir Robin Day, those of us who can remember him, Peter Sissons, that kind of generation, I don't remember any news reader or presenter, and Sir Robin Day was pretty, not pretty, he was very tough on interviews, but you never got the impression that you understood what his personal view was. Same with Jeremy Paxman, no matter how tough he was, when he was in his prime, I don't remember feeling that, oh, he's very left-wing or right-wing. But something seems to have happened more recently where the public feels that the BBC perhaps isn't quite as even-handed as it might be. Now, we're hearing more recently in the press that the new Director General is trying to clamp down on this kind of issue of journalists and news presenters overtly and publicly giving their views, for example, on Twitter. I don't think it's right that, for example, a Newsnight presenter is publicly criticizing or condemning or saying negative things about a particular political figure. If you want to be in the business of journalism, then be in the business of journalism. If you want to be a politician, then be like me and become a politician. I don't think you can mix the two. So I think there are issues there to be addressed on the inform aspect of it. And as Sophia was talking, all sorts of ideas came into my head, and I sort of wrote them down. So let me have a look. So in terms of the funding, when the license fee way of doing things began, back in those days, it was probably the appropriate thing to do. But the world has moved on. There are all sorts of models around at the moment, and there is a large contingent of people in the public who resent having to pay this license fee, particularly if you don't really watch the BBC or you don't consume its content. But there is, I sort of give a note of caution there, because I feel if the BBC went completely down a subscription-based or some kind of subscription-based model, I sort of feel something might be lost there. And what I mean by that is the sort of closest equivalent we have to the BBC in America is PBS, the Public Broadcasting Service. And I don't know if I can quite describe exactly what I mean, but there's a certain quality you get in their, particularly their documentaries. Any of you have seen documentaries like the Civil War or more recent one on Vietnam, to create that kind of high quality, real in-depth documentary, that's the sort of thing you would look to the BBC to do something like that, and in America, the PBS. And I just wonder if it all became a subscription-based model, would they lose the capacity to do those really sort of Rolls-Royce high-quality documentaries where you need to give freedom for things to for directors and producers to have that freedom, to have wide-ranging scan on what they're creating. So I sort of just wonder about going down the subscription route. I won't go on too long, just another couple of things. The two more things. The amount that people on the BBC are paid, I think that's another great problem for many people in the public. Any particular individual who earn millions and millions, you sort of wonder whether that is appropriate for the BBC. And all I would say is, I've been to a number of what you might call low budget, local events done by actors in different countries around the world, and you wouldn't believe the talent that is out there if they were just given the chance. So I'm not of the view that you have a extremely high paid presenter, for example, and they're irreplaceable. I think that needs to be looked at. And my final point would be around echo chambers. That's another sort of thought that came into my mind. With Netflix and things like that, you have the ability to home in on purely what you like, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, we all live in a free world, and we're in a free country, and you should be able to just choose and see what you want. But I think there needs to be room for us to. I think we ought to be seeing things which are not our natural views and be exposed to it. So, for example, I'm absolutely certain I don't agree with everything that all of you who are on this call, the views that you have. I'll agree with some of them, but not all of them. And I think this is a healthy thing. And so I just have a slight worry there. If you went down that kind of Netflixy model, would it be the case that people lose the ability to be exposed to a much wider range of views? So there's my opening, slightly rambling, but forgive me and thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, Jeet, for your thoughts on the BBC there. And finally, certainly last but certainly not least, we have Harry Fone, the grassroots campaign manager for the Taxpayers Alliance. Harry, can we please have your thoughts on the future of the BBC?
Certainly. Thank you, Dan, and thank you to Michael and everyone at the Croydon Constitutionalists for organising this meeting. I believe we were supposed to have it back in April, but in a pub, but sadly that didn't happen. But let's hope we can one day have another debate like this in a pub sometime soon. Well, where to begin? So I actually have a personal connection with the BBC in that my parents met at the BBC. So it's quite possible I wouldn't even be here sitting talking to you now were it not for that. But despite that rather fortuitous meeting, I would still, I'm not a fan of the BBC in its current state, it's fair to say. And this is something that the Taxpayers Alliance, ever since we started 16 years ago, that we've rallied against the current funding model of the BBC. It is essentially, it is a TV tax. It is a tax on owning a television. Now, I've been at the TPA for about 3 years. We've done many campaigns in that time, and I have to say this is by far our Axe the Tax campaign on the BBC is by far our most popular and most subscribed campaign. No question about it. We've had something like 7,500 signatures for our petition that demanded that the huge salaries paid to people like Gary Lineker and Zoe Ball that these be stopped. We took part in a consultation on decriminalisation of the licence fee. Again, I think we had about 3,000 supporters took part in that. And the enthusiasm from the supporters as well is just overwhelming. I mean, they just keep sending us so many examples of the TV licensing, sending them their threatening letters because they haven't paid their TV license. In many cases, you know, they don't own a TV, and they still are bombarded with these letters through the door. So this is very much something that I think it's fair to say the nation, a majority of the nation is not happy with the service that they are being provided by the BBC. You know, throughout as Dan said, it's been going nearly 100 years now, and a lot has changed in that time. You know, it probably did make sense all those years ago to have a sort of license fee system, but ever since the invention of, well, other channels coming along for a start, such as ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, then satellite, then you've had the internet and the streaming and Netflix and YouTube and Amazon and everything that goes with it, it really doesn't make sense anymore. Another thing that's happened that's really interesting for the BBC is it's basically helped to kill off regional news competition. You are seeing far fewer local newspapers than you ever did. In some cases, I remember growing up, I grew up in Milton Keynes. There used to be quite a few sort of independent local radio stations. Now it seems to be the sort of bigger ones that can survive, like sort of Heart FM and things like that. But the BBC effectively has a monopoly on local news reporting, which does not make it easy for other outlets to compete. And I'm not going to say it has unlimited money at its disposal, the BBC, but it does essentially have a guaranteed means of income. Now they are trying to make some headway in that. They're trying to reduce, I believe, the number of presenters on radio shows in an effort to cut costs, but they're still not truly opening themselves up to competition. Then we've seen the way that they've treated the over 75s. Now, it's fair to say the Taxpayers Alliance doesn't necessarily think that sort of tax break should have been brought in the first place, that over 75s get a free TV license, because if you're going to give it to them, why not give it to other people that are struggling? For example, you know, the unemployed over 18, for example. But it seems to me that the BBC could quite easily pay for these salaries, and indeed they agreed to it. They agreed to it when the BBC renegotiated the charter, and yet they essentially reneged on it. And this has done nothing to help their cause. And I come back to it, especially when you see how they spend their money. £1.75 million for Gary Lineker a couple of years ago. I believe he's had a slight pay cut since, but he's still earning over seven figures. You see that they buy numerous copies of The Guardian, despite it's free online to read. Sending people up and down the country to their studios in Manchester. A colleague of mine was on their morning show up in Manchester. They sent him up on the train. They put him up in a nice hotel, and then in the morning when he went back, he was going with the presenter on the train home. There are so many ways that they are misusing taxpayers' money and not spending it efficiently. But let's look at what the future should be for the BBC. I mentioned decriminalisation earlier. It's ridiculous. It's scandalous that you can potentially go to prison for not paying your TV license. And indeed, this non-payment tends to affect, I believe, single mothers hardest of all. They tend to get quite hefty fines. They are sort of the most persecuted, most prosecuted of people. In fact, 1 in 10 magistrates cases are taking up with license fee issues. So we've been fighting on that side of things. As I say, we took part in the consultation. I believe we had around 3,000 submissions to that. So that is the first step, decriminalisation for non-payment of the licence fee. And I think that's coming. I think the government are seeing sense on that, and I would expect that to happen within the next year, maybe 2 years. It's also worth saying, on the broader point of the BBC, no one is trying to emulate the current system we have. I've not seen Netflix or Amazon or anyone like that, lobbying the government, say, oh, well, we want in on this licence fee thing. Oh, it's a brilliant idea. They don't want it because they know it doesn't work. They know the models they have at the moment are much more profitable, means they can make better programs, target their audiences better. They're just not calling for it. Now, the license fee is guaranteed until 2027, unfortunately, so about 7 years away. But I and the Taxpayers Alliance firmly believe it's got to move to a subscription-based model where people are not forced to pay for it. If the BBC is as good as it claims, it should be chomping at the bit for a subscription-based model, because I think it can potentially make more money than it ever has done. It can reach people in ways it has never done before. It can be an even bigger entity than it wants to be. Now, I know that won't please everyone, because some people probably wouldn't like to see the BBC exist at all. That's not what we're arguing for. I think the BBC does have some very good qualities. I wasn't aware that Doctor Who had gone downhill, but there you go. And I think indeed it has some very good shows. It has some very good presenters. I should single out Roberto Perroni of Three Counties Radio, who always has us on our show, despite knowing our position on the BBC. Same for Eddie Nestor of Radio London, and indeed Stephen Nolan of Radio 5 Live and BBC Radio Ulster. They are very good at what they do, and I thank them very much for having us on. But as it stands, the BBC has diverted a long way from its Reithian principles of 98 years ago, and I think the only way it's going to survive and adapt is if it moves to a subscription-based model. So I'll hand back to Dan, but those are my thoughts on the future of the BBC.
Well, thank you, Harry, for your thoughts there. We'll now move to a short panel session with all three of our speakers. If anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask of the panel, do please use the chat function that is available on this platform. But I think for starters, I'd just like to ask the panel. Obviously, we're now into lockdown to electric boogaloo. Whether you'll be watching the BBC over the next few weeks, or whether you'll be using one of your subscription services. Jeet, if I can put that question to you first.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, with the American election going on right now, it's interesting. Probably I'm watching. It depends on what you're subscribed to, doesn't it? But I'm probably watching CNN more than anything else. But it's interesting. I don't know if it's a British versus American thing. The Americans are, on the BBC, they don't call the states quite as early as they are on the American networks. I don't know if that's just in Britain, we're just naturally a bit more reserved. We want to make sure before we call it. But I do tend to take a look at, because sometimes I'm not sure, has that state been called? Then I'll have a look at the BBC one. Oh, right, maybe it hasn't properly been called yet. So, isn't that funny as a thought experiment? In my mind, I'll go to the sort of the British, if not necessarily the British one per se, I'll go to the British one just to be absolutely sure, because in my mind I'm thinking maybe the Americans are kind of getting a bit carried away. Otherwise, as I said in my piece, I mainly watch bits and pieces on YouTube. I look up things that I want to watch on YouTube. The odd thing on Netflix and Amazon. And to be honest, Amazon Prime and Netflix, I sometimes just run out. I'm not interested in any of it. So I ended up just watching Groundhog Day the other day and absolutely loved it. I recommend watching Groundhog Day again and again, if that's not going to create a parallel universe or something by doing that.
Well, as we're in lockdown, that might be an appropriate film to watch actually at the moment. Sophia, what are your entertainment plans over the next few weeks? Will you be tuning into the Beeb?
Well, news-wise, I have to confess I do actually use the BBC. I even have the app. I just find it's the best way to get all the latest news, which is a bit ironic, I suppose. But I am also subscribed to the Times, so that's my other news source. And I suppose whatever comes along on the social media, you know, where you like all the different news pages, and I suppose that's my other way of finding things out. Entertainment wise, I'm also very much a YouTube and Netflix or Amazon Prime. And yeah, I think I was watching the X-Files the other day on Amazon Prime, so also definitely a fan of rewatching old things again and again.
Well, I remember when the BBC used to show nothing but repeats, so it's perhaps improved slightly since then. Harry, what are you going to be doing entertainment and news-wise over the next few weeks?
Well, I tend to watch a lot of sport, so the BBC doesn't have too much of that these days. So you can guess where I watch most of that. Jeet made a really good point actually about, you know, using BBC as a source of news, and I think there's a wider point there about things like the BBC World Service. Now, I probably actually could make a justification for keeping that because its soft power influence is quite impressive. I think there's a lot of people in parts of the world who have relied on the BBC over many decades for a reliable source of news. So that is possibly one thing I would make an exception for. In terms of what else I'll be watching, I watch a lot of stuff on YouTube too. I'm very much into cars and car repair, and the level of detail that people can go into in one of their YouTube videos is quite fascinating, and it's quite sort of I don't know, almost sort of therapeutic watching people sort of carry out these repairs. But you would never get this level of detail. Like, you know, on YouTube you've got you know, reviews of mobile phones, reviews of watches, reviews of anything you can think of. Now, if that was on a television program, you think of, like, you know, the Judith Chalmers on the old holiday, I forget what was it called, Get Me Away or something, I've forgotten.
Wish You Were Here.
Wish You Were Here, that's it, there we go. I'm thinking of the Thomas Cook advert. You know, they would maybe do 5-10 minutes on a holiday place. Now on YouTube or anywhere on the internet, you can get, you know, 1,000 opinions on a place that everyone's taken a video, everyone's taken a photo or made it into a YouTube thing. So you don't just have to have a 5-10 minute synopsis. You can have an hour-long in detailed review of something or something you're interested in. It could be Doctor Who, for example. There could be fan things dedicated to that. So the internet and streaming and everything like that just offers a world of choice that the sort of classic aerial, free-to-air television doesn't, such as the BBC. So yeah, I've got loads to watch. I'm quite happy.
What do you guys think of, and this phrase came to me, the tyranny of choice? I mean, there's just so much out there. Sometimes I'm on Netflix, and I hope I'm not rambling now. You know, on Netflix, I'll flick through it trying to find something to watch for about half an hour. And you sort of sometimes wish something would just come on TV and I'll watch it. Do you ever get overwhelmed with the amount of choice? And I'm not sort of, you know, having, what's the phrase? I'm not sort of giving up. But what do you think about that?
I'd rather have too much choice than too little choice. You know, it's like I say about this is a completely left field example, but when people complain about obesity in this country, it's like I say, it's far better to have too much food than too little food, because one is much worse. Now, I realise choice of television isn't the end of the world if you didn't have television, but no, I think choice is fantastic. You know, the more choice you have, the more competition there is, and ultimately the better quality services, and you know, prices will be driven down ultimately. So it can only be good news for the consumer, in my opinion.
There's something about the collective experience, though, isn't there? For example, when there's an England football match on, we all watch that. That's probably the only collectively thing, that kind of thing is probably. Whereas there was a time where, I don't know, whatever program, I'm probably older than most of you, like Dallas or something. Everyone used to watch it, didn't they? Because that was the best thing on TV. But now,
Who shot JR?
Sorry?
It's Who Shot JR, wasn't it?
They are, yeah. But you know what I mean? That was my point around sort of echo chambers. If we're all watching our own individual things, do we lose something as a collective? Question mark. I don't have the answer.
Sophia, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the question. Well, I suppose even with kind of moving away from the BBC and watching TV, as it were, and enjoying that collectively, I think shows that are on separate platforms are still quite good at that. I can't think of a very recent one, but for example, Game of Thrones was massive, but like we couldn't watch that on TV. I think, is it HBO? But then everyone found their own way of kind of getting to it. So I don't think we're losing the collective experience that much. And actually, over the lockdown, Netflix brought in this plugin where you can watch things together as like a friend group, and you could chat about the show on the side. So I guess that kind of works too. But yeah, I know what you mean, though. It is kind of nice to go to the office and everyone knows what they've been watching and they catch up on it through that. But I don't think we're losing it, personally.
I don't know if this is going off a little bit, Dan, but another thing that occurred to me is radio. And I know Harry mentioned it as well. So the Times Radio has just started recently. The Times newspaper. I don't know if you guys listen to it, but if you subscribe to the Times, you don't need to be a subscriber to the Times newspaper to listen to Times Radio.
Okay.
I'm
not
really worth checking out Times Radio. It's like a breath of fresh air. Few people from the BBC have come over to it. So Michael Portillo presents programs on it. Andrew Neil has. The guy used to do five live, the drive time show. Can't remember his name. Political guy. So I mean, it's a very good radio station actually. And one of the things that differentiates them is they don't constantly interrupt their guests. They give them plenty of time to make their point. And as a result, it's a higher quality listening experience. Whereas if you listen to sort of Today program in the morning, it's almost like they're trying to just trip them up the whole time. And the end result is, well, I don't know what you think. I end up thinking, well, why did you invite him if you're just going to keep interrupting and annoying him the whole time? And for the listener, it's not very good either. Mm-hmm. So it does show, doesn't it? If competition does come in, they can find a way of providing a service in a better way, in my opinion.
Sorry, Sophia, we've had some interesting comments from some of our audience tonight. Dan Lidicott is saying how good it is to have so much choice now, whereas I'm sure he remembers the days when there wasn't much choice available. And Mick has discovered quite a lot of interesting stuff on YouTube. So a big thumbs up there for YouTube.
Can I just talk about radio quickly?
Please do.
There's some really interesting things about radio. Just Jeet mentioning Times Radio there, which is I mentioned local stations have had a bad time of it, but if you look at national stations, the amount of commercial national stations opening is quite staggering at the moment. There's been things like, in the classical music sector, you've had I think it's Scala opening. You've seen sort of the expansion of how talk radio and LBC. I mean, their listening figures are going up, but also they're moving into this really interesting world now where they're live streaming on YouTube their radio stations. And now, I mean, I've been on talk radio a couple of times recently, and they asked me to, dial in on Skype or Zoom or whatever, which you used to just do it on the mobile phone, but now they want the video of you, which is so strange. This is supposed to be radio, but it seems to me that they're innovating in a way that the BBC isn't. But as I say, if you look at the listening hours, commercial radio stations have been growing very well recently in the last couple of years, but actually it's the BBC that's in decline. In that area, and it does tend to be these talk radio stations as well. That where you have a debate, LBC, Talk Radio, even Talk Sport, that people are drawn to. And I think it taps into what Jeet was saying about people sort of want a long form discussion where their views can be heard fairly. They don't want a presenter butting in every 5 or 10 seconds. So we often talk about the BBC and television, but I think radio, it shouldn't be ignored either.
No, very good point there, Harry. Well, I'm hopefully I haven't been butting in every 10 seconds and have allowed the panel to have their say there. Graham is asking how you would deal with the fact that if you're reliant upon advertising revenue, how that would have worked when you have a lockdown situation and advertising revenue goes down quite a lot. How would a business like the BBC how would it cope in that such a situation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question, but it just shows, doesn't it, that if that was the scenario, the BBC was relying on advertising revenue and revenue's not coming in, then the BBC would go out of business. That's the answer to the exam question. But I think more broadly, what that indicates is, I wonder, does there need to be room in the broad spectrum of things for something like the BBC? But it's just that the model of paying for it is out of date. Question mark. I'm answering a question with a question, Graham. That's what politicians do. The other one we do is, I don't disagree, which is a good way of saying either I agree or I disagree. But I better stop there.
Well, of course, somebody else's revenue has gone down as a result of the lockdown, and that would be Sadiq Khan's revenue for TfL. And but that's okay because we've bailed him out once again. And of course, who knows, we maybe would have bailed out the BBC in such circumstances. But anyway, we must bring the panel discussion to an end there. I'd like to thank our three guest speakers this evening, Sofia, Jeet and Harry. And I'd like to thank our other attendees for attending and for asking your questions. If you'd like to join future events, whether they're virtual or hopefully at some point in the near future, we'll be back in a pub somewhere. Do please keep up to date with what we're up to. You can follow us on at Croydon Const on the Twitter, via our Facebook page, or via our website, croydonconstitutionalists.uk. Until next time, thank you and stay safe, everybody.